If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Is hypnobirthing worth it? I ask Hannah, who is a registered and endorsed midwife, lactation consultant, and award-winning childbirth educator based in Adelaide, South Australia. I ask her all these hard questions. So is hypnobirthing worth it? What is hypnobirthing? What are the disadvantages of hypnobirthing? And does hypnobirthing actually work? So with Hannah's background, working as a midwife in multiple hospitals in a variety of settings, she knows the ins and outs of the maternity system here in Australia, and she is passionate about helping women to achieve a positive pregnancy, birth, and postnatal experience. You're going to love this episode. Hannah provides some really great tips, and we finish up with me asking her the question, if someone was to give birth tomorrow, what would be your 3 biggest tips? So you're going to love it. If you're pregnant or you're planning a future pregnancy, whether or not you have a vaginal birth or a caesarean birth, I really do believe there is something that each and every one can take away from this episode. Before we do dive into this episode, I just want to thank you all so much for supporting this podcast along the way. It is now over 3 years old. We've released over 170 episodes, and this podcast is now listened to in over 100 countries around the world. So thank you so much for your support and sharing this with your pregnant friends too. And thank you also for the ratings and reviews this podcast has received over the year. Because I'm not sure if you're aware, but sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast is probably the most important way to help this podcast grow. And at the end of the day, if we can just help one more friend or family member or one more pregnant woman have a wonderful motherhood experience, then we should all be happy. So thank you all for sharing this podcast. And if you haven't yet rated and reviewed, I encourage you, or I invite you to head to your podcast app. So if it's an Apple podcast, click on the podcast and then you scroll all the way down to the bottom where you see the stars. And if you've enjoyed it, go ahead, rate it, review it. I do read each and every review. So thank you so much again for all your support along the way. Right, let's dive into this episode all about hypnobirthing for birth. Hannah, thank you so much for joining me on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. It's really exciting to chat today about hypnobirthing and discussing all things hypnobirthing and preparing for birth.
Thanks, Kath. I'm really excited for our chat today.
We have been trying to tee this up for a long time, so it's exciting to finally have it booked in. Tell us a little bit, how did you come into this area of hypnobirthing?
So I first came into hypnobirthing from really seeing people using it. From working as a midwife, I at the time was working in a few different areas in the hospital I was at, but predominantly in the labour ward and the birth centre. And I just saw people coming in using it who were doing hypnobirthing, and their births were very different in a good way to a lot of people that I was caring for, and they just seemed really informed and really confident in what they were doing and what techniques they can use, and their partners seemed to be really confident too, and they just worked so well as a team. And that's what really piqued my interest in hypnobirthing and sharing it with parents.
So this is before you even had children?
It was, yes. So a lot of hypnobirthing teachers come to hypnobirthing from their own birth and their own experience and having an amazing birth and a positive birth. And then that, I think, for a lot of them gives that drive to then teach it. And I was kind of the opposite. I have been teaching hypnobirthing had been teaching for about 7 years before I had my son last year. So yeah, kind of the opposite, but it was amazing to be able to put the techniques and the mindset and everything into place myself.
Now, this isn't what we're diving into today, but tell us, how did it help you with your birth?
Yeah, absolutely. So my goal for my birth, or what I really wanted, was a low intervention birth or a physiological birth. And so I knew that if I was wanting to work with labour, I knew that it was going to be intense and I was going to need techniques and strategies to work with that. So for me, that was probably some of the biggest ways that it helped in my labour, with having techniques to use throughout labour, particularly for my partner. He's not in this world of pregnancy and birth and babies like myself, and, had not been at labours before like I had. So we spent a lot of time in pregnancy practicing the techniques together so that he was confident in what he could do to help. And just the mindset work in the lead up to birth, just really building that confidence and trusting my body, and particularly for me, dropping into more of that mum headspace than the midwife headspace as well. And we had an amazing birth. It was incredible and everything that I was hoping for. And yeah, he was born, had a water birth. He was a big baby. He was 5 kilos, so he was a big kid. But yeah, we had an amazing experience, and I credit a lot of the experience that we had to having the tools and techniques to work with labour.
Amazing. So you were a midwife. You knew all these techniques and tools. How did because you just said you invested quite a bit of time into helping your partner learn these tools. How did that help you?
I know from seeing families and seeing couples working together in labour how big an impact the partner is, especially if they can be confident in what they're doing and they can stay calm too, because it's all quite unknown for them, right? And can be quite overwhelming for partners as well, and quite foreign. And so for me, I was really confident in birth and with, what my hormones were doing and my physiology, and I had obviously a really good understanding of that. And I wanted to make sure that he had that understanding as well, so that then he could stay calm and he could understand what was going on, and he could kind of be an equal part in, the decision-making and with how we were working as a team in labour as well. And then, of course, things like we went through lots of massage techniques together and lots of discussions around language and just staying positive and encouraging and those kind of things. And he was great. Was incredible on the day. Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear. So let's take a step back. I know this might seem like a really silly question, but so everyone's on the same page, what is hypnobirthing?
Yeah, it's definitely not a silly question. I think that's a common question that people will ask, because hypnobirthing, while it's gaining popularity and more people are doing it, it still is a bit like, well, what actually is it, and what am I going to be learning, or what do we actually teach? So with hypnobirthing, really what hypnobirthing is the use of hypnosis and birth. So it's really quite a general term. There's lots of different ways that people can learn hypnobirthing, and there's lots of different courses, and they're all a little bit different. So the main approach with hypnobirthing, yes, is using hypnosis with birth, but some people may do one-on-one sessions with a hypnotherapist, and that will be focused more on the hypnosis. Others might do a course like a childbirth education course like what I teach that incorporates hypnobirthing, but is also going to incorporate other things like active birth techniques and breathing and movement and advocacy and understanding your options and that kind of thing as well. So I think while the term hypnobirthing, it's a little bit vague, I guess, because it is the use of hypnosis and birth. I think how we commonly see hypnobirthing, particularly here in Australia, is as a course that incorporates the hypnosis and then lots of other techniques and strategies for birth as well.
And I think the general awareness around hypnobirthing has increased so much in the last 10 years. And this is showing my age, but when I gave birth to my first baby 11 years ago in 1 month, hypnobirthing was, and again, I'm a bit embarrassed to even admit this, but 11 years ago I thought,
you know what, you just need to learn some relaxation exercises, some deep breathing. I can do that. Of course I can breathe. I don't need help to learn how to breathe. And so I sort of disregarded it. And look, you can't live in the past and there's no regrets, but I do always regret not arming myself and empowering myself more with that first birth, because it knocked me for a sixer, as it does a lot of women. But I just felt there was a lot of unknown. So I do love, the more I learn about hypnobirthing, I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's where, there is a lot more awareness happening around what hypnobirthing is and what it isn't. And I think really hypnobirthing is about helping people to have a positive mindset when it comes to their birth and have tools and techniques, but also really encouraging them to have the type of birth or work towards the type of birth that's right for them. So I think, we often used to think hypnobirthing is just for people wanting no pain relief or wanting to avoid an epidural or things like that. But really it's for anyone who would like to feel more in the driver's seat and would like to have more strategies and more information around the different options when it comes to birth.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months. Yes, that's 9 months. They also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
Okay. So in you saying that, is there any evidence or research to show that does hypnobirthing work? And I guess importantly, how does hypnobirthing work?
Yes. So hypnobirthing, I think, is always going to be something that's a little bit tricky to research given that each program is so different. So when we look at the research around hypnosis, some studies look at people that have attended courses, and that might be a 3-hour course or it might be a 12-hour course. They've looked at sometimes courses that include partners or those that mums attend on their own. And that to me is always going to be, I think this is the thing, that research is always going to be a little bit varying because of, like, for me, partner support is massive and is a massive part of what I teach. So it's a little bit tricky. I know there is a Cochrane review that has been done on hypnosis and using hypnosis in birth, and that looked at a number of studies. I think off the top of my head it was about 8 or 9 studies. They did acknowledge that a lot of those studies were quite small numbers and small populations, and that's what I find when I'm looking at the research as well. But what they did find is that there may be a decrease in need for pain relief and more satisfaction in the pain relief, as in a mum's satisfaction with the intensity of her labour. So that was quite small research. But what we are starting to see, which I actually find more interesting because I feel like it aligns more with what I teach, is more research looking at independent childbirth education courses that incorporate techniques like breathing, visualization, movement, relaxation, active birth positions, partner support, those kind of things. We've got a few studies coming out now looking at a course like that compared to the standard hospital courses. And there has been actually quite a big change in the number of women having an epidural and having a emergency caesarean or a non-elective caesarean in those that did the course that incorporated the techniques versus those that did the standard hospital course. So I find that research quite interesting because for me, teaching hypnobirthing, I do teach it as part of a course. The hypnosis that we teach is all self-hypnosis, and while it's a really important part of the course, it's not hypnotherapy and it's not one-on-one sessions with a hypnotherapist. And I often say that it's probably about 10% of everything that we teach in the course. So I always look at that research as well when I'm looking at what I'm teaching and what I'm incorporating into my course. But it would be amazing to see more research around hypnobirthing, and it's something I would like to get into in the future.
Oh, there you go. Just another thing to add to your plate.
Yes, exactly. Not in the maybe a little bit distant future.
Okay, so you mentioned, just to summarise what you said you mentioned that hypnobirthing might help with reducing the amount of pain relief. It might reduce the intervention required with birth, and it might improve the woman's satisfaction of her birth. Were they the three main ones you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think that's the main things that I would see. And I think especially what I see with my clients a lot is they are more confident and calm throughout their pregnancy and the last few weeks of pregnancy, and they feel more confident in their decisions. And I think that can really flow through to parenting afterwards, and feeling like you are in the driver's seat of your experience and knowing that you can ask questions and you can advocate and you do have options and choices. And that to me is another benefit with hypnobirthing, is having that knowledge. Like, knowledge is power, and the more that we can learn about labour and birth, the calmer we're going to feel when the time comes.
Amazing. Love that. Are there any disadvantages? Are there any women that shouldn't consider hypnobirthing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think hypnobirthing can help anyone. I think there are various options for people depending on what they're hoping for. I think most hypnobirthing courses, and including my group course that I run, are more aimed at those that are hoping for a low intervention birth. I think we have a lot of focus on hormones and techniques to work with that intensity of labour. And so if I am, say, working with a mum who's having a planned caesarean or an elective caesarean, then I often find the one-on-one hypnobirthing classes to be more beneficial, because then we can go more into caesareans and ways that we can use the techniques and the mindset tools in a caesarean birth. I think sometimes for mums, it can be a bit frustrating learning about all the amazing hormonal cocktail that can happen with physiological birth when they know they're not going to be going down that path. So I would say that maybe certain course options would be more suited to someone's journey. But I do think that hypnobirthing can help anyone, no matter what type of birth they are planning. And as far as disadvantages, I don't really think there are any disadvantages. I think it can be quite eye-opening for mums and partners, and can really, be quite eye-opening with some of our intervention rates in Australia, and navigating our maternity system, and some of the potential conflicts with hospital policy, how it's not always aligned with the latest research and evidence that we're seeing and things that are coming out. So I think it can be quite an eye-opener for families. And often people say they learn a lot more in the course than they were expecting, which to me is always helpful.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I know this is a podcast episode and you offer a brilliant course and services to help with this. So if anyone wants to find out more, check the links in the bio. But for all the listeners today, so they can finish this podcast episode with some, something a bit more meaty and juicy, some practical information. What would be your, let's say three beautiful practical strategies for mums who, let's say, their birth's tomorrow and they haven't had time to do a hypnobirthing course? Let's do it. 3 practical strategies, tips for women that they can actually use.
Yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot
Absolutely,
here.
Yeah. So let's say if what I was going to say was about building knowledge, so learning as much as you can, but let's just say if we do have a mum that is, going into labour tomorrow, or is 38 weeks pregnant, or 39 weeks or something like that, I would say one of the best things to do would be to sit down with your partner and talk to them about what you would ideally like for your birth. If you've read about anything, if you've heard about anything, and things like, do you want to use water? Do you want to use the shower or the bath in labour? Would you like a water birth? Would you like to be able to be active and birth in the position of choice that works for you and works for your body? Would you like an epidural? Would you like to use some of the other options like opioid medications or the gas? Are you open to that, or are you hoping to avoid those things? I think sitting down and having a really good discussion with your partner or whoever's going to be there with you for your birth is important, because they're not a mind reader and they're not going to know what to offer and what to suggest on the day when we haven't talked about it before. So that's a big strategy that I often talk about, and one that I think is quite easy to implement. And then I would also recommend a bit of work around releasing fears as well. I think it's really common for us to have some worries or fears around birth, and that's a big part of hypnobirthing, is working through that. But even just taking out a blank piece of paper and writing at the top, what do I fear about birth? And just seeing what it brings to light. Sometimes we can all be quite different with what worries we have or what fears we have when it comes to birth. And I take the approach of looking at it in two ways that we can tackle that. One is a more practical way, in that, do we need to learn more? Do we need to know more about something? Is that where that fear is coming from? Or really identifying, is it just someone's story that you've been told, or something that you've seen on TV or movies that's maybe not actually real life but has stuck in our brain a little bit? And so it can help to identify those things. And then there's much more we can go into with fear release around using affirmations and using lots of different strategies, which is a lot of what hypnobirthing is about, working on more the mindset of those fears. But even just identifying what they are and starting to explore them, and even chatting with your care provider, your midwife or obstetrician, about those things, because a lot of it, I think, does come down to that lack of knowledge and feeding into that fear of the unknown. And so I think fear release work can be a big topic, and I would say to people, if they do have more time, that's a great thing to go more in depth with. But it's something that I think we can always explore leading into birth. And the last tip, I think, for someone who's about to birth, I think just remember that there are thousands of women across the world every day who are giving birth, and you're not alone. And this is something that us as a species really have been doing for a very long time. And our bodies most of the time do know what to do. And I know it's sometimes hard to trust that, but think about in pregnancy, your body is growing this baby every day, and we're not having to think about what to do. We're not having to think about getting your placenta to send them certain nutrients or things like that. It just happens, right? And most of the time we grow, babies beautifully. And of course, sometimes we need medical interventions, and sometimes things fall outside of that realm of normal, and we have access to support for that if we need it, medical care for that if we need it. But at the end of the day, a contraction is the uterus muscle working, doing its job, doing, what it's designed to do. It's that real physiological intensity, and that muscle's working hard, but that muscle is doing its job. And so having that, I know we say trust in your body, but that whole trust in your body term, what does that actually mean for everybody is a little bit different, but just really having that confidence that this is a physiological event for our body. It's not necessarily an emergency waiting to happen, which is sometimes the narrative we hear a lot in society. That's probably
Love that.
Big tips thrown in there. A few different things. But I think this is the thing with birth preparation. It doesn't have to always be this complex thing, but I think it is worth preparing for, because birth is a huge event in our lives, and it's something where, like you were saying with your first baby, a lot of people afterwards will say, I wish I had prepared a bit more. And I think it's so common, especially with our first baby, because it is that prevailing message in society a bit, I think, in that, you just go with the flow, don't have a birth plan. You've just got to go with whatever happens. You can't control it. That's often what people get told. And then I think sometimes we get thrust into birth, and it can be quite overwhelming. And that's when we go, okay, I wish I had learned a bit more. I wish I had prepared a little bit more.
You're talking to me 10 years ago.
I know, but it's hard. I think often women feel bad or feel like they should have prepared and that they should have done a course, and why didn't they? And I just really think that it's that messaging that we get in society, and we put a lot of trust in our care providers as well, and we sort of think that they'll just tell us what to do on the day, which of course they can provide their support. But I think having those resources yourself and that confidence yourself and with your support team and your partner is massive and goes a long way. And also supporting afterwards when you take your baby home and you guys are navigating it all as a team.
And I say the exact same thing, but for postnatal recovery. Don't leave it by chance. Don't just assume you're going to get stronger again, get back into running, like whatever it is that you want to get back into doing. Like, let's actually reinvest back into the body and be a little bit proactive about it, because you will thank yourself in the future.
Exactly. And there's a lot that we can be proactive about, isn't there? We can't control every aspect of labour and birth and our recovery, but there is so much that actually is in our control and things that we can proactively work on.
Amazing chat. Thank you, Hannah. I feel that was beautiful, short and sweet episode. Perfect.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad. Yeah, thank you for having me. Hopefully everyone finds that helpful.
Absolutely. And how can people find you?
So the best place, I hang out on Instagram a lot and I try and share lots of information and tips on there. So my Instagram is Hannah Willsmore Midwife. And also my website has lots of information about hypnobirthing and the different options for learning hypnobirthing, and also a free intro to hypnobirthing training on there as well that people can access if they are interested in learning more about hypnobirthing. And that is just Hannah Willsmore with 2 L's .com.
Brilliant. And I'll have all those links in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks, Kath.
Thanks for joining me, Hannah. We'll chat soon.
That's it, ladies. Before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Hannah at fitnessmama.com/podcast. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to you joining me very soon for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.